What if I told you that every single thing your grandfather taught you about keeping your fishing line perfectly straight was actually costing you the biggest catch of your life? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a topic that sounds absolutely crazy. Is intentionally tangling your line the bizarre secret to mimicking a wounded baitfish perfectly? I know you are probably rolling your eyes right now, but stick with me. By the end of this video, you are going to discover a completely unexpected truth about how predatory fish hunt. I am going to show you why your flawless, smooth retrieve is exactly why you are going home empty-handed on those tough days. Let me ask you right now and be honest in the comments. Have you ever caught a massive fish while your reel was jammed in a bird nest and your lure was just twitching aimlessly in the water? Think about it. Let us set the stage here. Ever since we were kids holding our very first fishing rod, the golden rule has always been the same. Keep your line tight, keep your line straight. Avoid wind knots at all costs. We have been brainwashed into thinking that a perfect, unblemished presentation is the only way to fool a smart predator. We spend hundreds of dollars on ultra-smooth reels and braided lines that cut through the water like a hot knife through butter. But why do we do this? Because it looks pretty to us. It feels right in our human hands. But out there, under the surface, the rules of survival are totally different. We have been doing the exact same thing for decades, casting perfectly, reeling smoothly, and wondering why the fish simply follow the bait to the boat and turn away. It is because perfection is not natural in the wild. Perfect means healthy, and predators do not want a healthy, fast meal. They want an easy, broken meal. Let us take a step back and picture a typical early morning on the water. The sun is just starting to peek over the tree line. The water is as smooth as a sheet of glass. You take a deep breath of that cool morning air and make your very first cast. It sails through the air beautifully. The lure hits the water with a soft splash. You begin to reel in. Turn after turn, your retrieve is absolutely flawless. The bait glides through the water like an Olympic swimmer, but nothing happens. 10 casts later, still nothing. You switch lures, you change colors. You talk to the guy in the boat next to you, and he is shaking his head too. Why is the bite so dead? The answer is staring right at you from the end of your fishing rod. Your presentation is simply too good. In the real world, a baitfish swimming perfectly straight and fast is a healthy fish. A healthy fish takes a lot of energy to catch. Big predators, whether they are bass or pike, are inherently lazy creatures. They do not want to burn calories chasing an athlete. They are waiting in the shadows for a mistake. They are looking for the weak link in the school. When you give them absolute perfection, you are actually signaling to them that this meal is going to be a hard chase. We need to break that illusion completely. Think about every weird, unexpected catch you have ever had in your life. I guarantee you can remember at least one time when everything went entirely wrong. You made a terrible cast. A massive gust of wind blew your line into a nearby bush, or worse, wrapped it around the tip of your rod. You are standing there, cursing under your breath, trying to untangle a nasty mess. Meanwhile, your lure is just sitting out there in the strike zone. Because your line is twisted and caught up, the lure is barely moving. It is just darting up and down slightly with every frustrated shake of your rod. Suddenly, bam! Your rod gets nearly ripped right out of your hands. You caught the biggest fish of the day while completely distracted by a knot. Was that just blind luck? For years, I told myself it was just a happy accident. But the more you talk to seasoned veteran anglers, the more you realize this happens way too often to be a coincidence. The messy line, the erratic jerking, the total lack of a rhythmic retrieve, it all combined to create the ultimate trigger for a hunting predator. That tangled line accidentally did something that all our expensive gear tries to prevent. It made the bait look genuinely vulnerable, confused, and struggling to survive. To truly understand why a tangled line works, we need to look at the harsh reality of nature. Have you ever actually watched a dying minnow or shad in the shallow water? It is not a graceful sight. When a baitfish is injured, stunned, or dying, it loses its equilibrium. It floats sideways. It twitches violently, stops completely, and then spirals downward. It kicks its tail in a panic, moving in jagged, unpredictable angles. Now compare that to how most of us work a lure. We cast out, wait a second, and reel back in a straight, predictable line. Even when we try to add action with our rod tip, there is often a mechanical rhythm to it. Twitch, twitch, pause. Twitch, twitch, pause. Predators have been watching that exact same mechanical movement pass by their faces for their entire lives. They learn to recognize the fake pattern. But when your line is intentionally slightly fouled up or rigged with a deliberate kink, the physics of the lure change completely. The tension on the line becomes uneven. A simple pull from your rod translates into a chaotic, spiraling jerk underwater. You are no longer imitating a fish swimming along happily. You are mimicking the tragic, erratic final moments of a dying meal. And that is a dinner bell for a big fish. Let us talk about the mental hurdle you have to overcome to even try this. As fishermen, we have massive egos when it comes to our gear and our technique. We pride ourselves on tying the perfect knot, spooling our reels with military precision, and making casts that can drop a jig into a coffee cup from 40 yards away. The idea of purposely creating a tangle or a knot in our line feels like absolute sacrilege. It feels like we are doing something incredibly wrong. But you have to ask yourself a very serious question. Are you out on the water to look professional, or are you out there to catch fish? The fish do not care how much your rod costs. They do not care how smooth your drag is. They only react to what is happening right in front of their faces. Breaking the mental barrier means accepting that sometimes doing it wrong is actually the right way to fish. You have to let go of the idea that an untangled, perfectly tight line is the only path to success. Once you accept that chaos triggers predatory strikes, a whole new world of presentation opens up to you. It takes guts to intentionally mess up your setup, especially when your fishing buddies are watching you, but they will not be laughing when you are the only one holding up a trophy at the end of the day. So how does a tangle actually change what happens under the surface of the water? When you have a perfectly straight line, energy transfers instantly and smoothly from your hand, down the rod, straight to the lure. The lure moves exactly as you direct it. But when you introduce a deliberate twist, a loose knot, or a heavy tangle just above the leader, you disrupt that energy transfer. Think of it like a shock absorber that is broken. When you snap your rod tip, the energy gets caught in the tangled mess first. The lure does not move immediately. Instead, there is a split-second delay, followed by an aggressive, snapping motion as the line momentarily pulls tight against the tangle. This creates a highly erratic, darting action that is physically impossible to replicate with a straight line. The lure will roll on its side, dig downward, and then float back up in a confused spiral. It looks exactly like a baitfish whose swim bladder has ruptured. It is fighting to swim straight, but keeps losing control. This uneven, broken physics is exactly what a big predator hones in on. They possess lateral lines that detect water displacement. The chaotic displacement caused by this broken energy transfer screams vulnerability to anything lurking in the weeds nearby. One of the biggest factors that makes the tangled line technique work is the concept of forced slack. When we are fishing normally, we are obsessed with keeping tension. We want to feel the bite. We want to be ready to set the hook the absolute millisecond a fish breathes on our bait. But absolute tension kills natural action. When your line has a tangle or a heavy twist in it, you are forced to fish with semi-slack line. The loops and coils in the water create drag and resistance on the surface, meaning your lure is essentially free-floating underneath. Picture a calm afternoon. You throw your bait out near a lily pad. Instead of pulling it tight, you leave that messy line sitting on the water. A gentle breeze catches the line. That tiny bit of wind slowly drags the tangle across the surface, moving the lure below at a painfully slow, agonizingly erratic pace. It barely twitches. It just hovers and drifts, occasionally bumping into a weed stalk. A bass sitting under that lily pad has been watching high-speed spinnerbaits fly past him all morning. He is not going to chase them. But this dying, drifting thing attached to a messy line? He does not have to chase it. He just opens his mouth and inhales it. The slack line created by the tangle is the ultimate stealth approach. Now, I am not telling you to take your reel, spin off 30 yards of braided line, and tie it into a hopeless bird nest that takes scissors to fix. That is just going to ruin your day. What we are talking about is creating a controlled, deliberate loop or twist in your presentation. There are a few ways the pros actually simulate this without destroying their gear. One common method is to intentionally twist the line right above the leader before tying on a swivel. You spin the line in your fingers until it coils up on itself tightly, creating a short, stiff, tangled section. When you cast this out, that twisted section acts like a wild spring. Every time you pause your retrieve, that coiled line tries to untwist itself underwater. This causes the lure to spin very slowly in place. Imagine a stunned minnow, nose down, slowly rotating in a circle as it fades away. That is precisely what this intentional twist replicates. You are building the error into the rig itself. It is a highly strategic way to use a tangle to your advantage. It gives you the chaotic action of a mess, but you still maintain enough structural integrity in the line to actually fight the fish once it bites. It is organized chaos at its absolute finest. Let us talk about water resistance and why a tangled line messes with the drag profile of your setup. A smooth line cuts through the water efficiently. It leaves almost no wake and creates very little sound. But a tangled section of line, full of loops and knots, creates a massive amount of micro-drag. As you pull it through the water, those loops catch the current. They create tiny little whirlpools and vibrations right above your lure. To a fish, the lateral line is their primary radar system. They feel the water moving before they ever see the bait. When you have a perfectly smooth line, they only feel the lure. But when you have a tangled section leading down to the lure, they feel a confusing, struggling mass of vibrations. It mimics a group of frantic, tiny baitfish, or one very disoriented, struggling creature kicking up a fuss. This extra resistance also slows down the fall rate of your lure. If you are using a sinking plastic, the tangled line acts like a miniature parachute. It holds the bait up in the water column just a fraction of a second longer, letting it slowly sway back and forth. That extra hang time in the strike zone is often all it takes to convince a wary predator to commit to the attack. Fishing is essentially psychological warfare between you and an animal with a brain the size of a green pea. But do not underestimate them. Older, larger fish have survived by learning patterns. They have seen every crankbait, every soft plastic, and every flawless retrieve you can imagine. They know what danger looks like. The perfectly straight line attached to a brightly colored piece of plastic, moving at a steady speed, spells danger to a mature fish. When you intentionally introduce a tangle, you are breaking their psychological pattern. You are throwing them a curveball they have never seen before. Imagine you are sitting on the bank. You cast out, let the line sink, and deliberately leave a huge, ugly bow of tangled line floating on the surface. You give the rod a violent, sloppy jerk. The lure darts crazily and then stops dead, floating backward. The fish watching this gets confused. Its natural instinct to avoid artificial lures conflicts with its predatory instinct to attack injured prey. The erratic, nonsensical movement overloads their caution. The instinct to feed on a dying animal takes over, completely bypassing their fear. You win the psychological war simply by refusing to play by the rules of perfect presentation. Not every lure in your tackle box is going to work perfectly with this tangled line method. If you try this with a heavy diving crankbait, you are just going to get frustrated. This bizarre secret works absolute miracles with specific types of baits. We are talking about soft plastic jerkbaits, weightless flukes, and floating stick baits. These lures are already designed to have an erratic action, but they are often limited by the tight line pulling them forward. When you fish a weightless fluke on a line with an intentional twist or tangle, the results are explosive. You cast it out over a submerged weed bed. Because the line is messed up, the fluke does not just glide, it snaps sideways, it flips upside down, it hangs motionless, trembling as the tension in the tangled line slowly shifts. This is the closest you will ever get to putting a living, breathing, dying fish on your hook without using actual live bait. Topwater baits like poppers and frogs also benefit immensely from this. A slight tangle in the line causes the frog to walk in completely unpredictable directions, rather than the standard left and right rhythm. It turns a mechanical piece of plastic into a desperate, struggling animal trying to escape the surface. There is a very specific trick used by deep water anglers that perfectly illustrates this concept. It is a variation of the drop shot rig, but rigged terribly on purpose. Normally, a drop shot is tied flawlessly, so the hook stands straight out from the line at a perfect 90-degree angle. It looks very neat and tidy. But some savvy fishermen will intentionally tie their drop shot with a highly twisted, slightly tangled knot, so the bait sags and hangs at a weird, downward angle. When they drop this down 30 feet into the dark water, they do not shake it aggressively. They just let it sit there. The natural current of the water catches the twisted line. Because the knot is imperfect and tangled, the bait does not just vibrate, it spins lazily, bumps against the main line, and looks incredibly distressed. A massive smallmouth bass swimming by sees this pathetic, struggling little minnow hanging limply from a chaotic knot. It does not look like a trick. It looks like the saddest, easiest meal in the lake. By abandoning the perfection of the 90-degree angle and embracing the tangled sag, these anglers catch fish right behind guys who are using perfect rigs. It is living proof that ugly often catches more fish than pretty. You might be wondering when the best time is to actually try this crazy tactic. The truth is, intentional tangles and chaotic line presentations shine the absolute brightest on the toughest days. We all know those days. The sky is bright blue. There is not a single cloud in sight. The wind is completely dead. The water is clear enough to read a newspaper on the bottom. These are the days when fish lock their jaws and refuse to eat anything. Your perfect presentations look incredibly fake under these bright, calm conditions. The fish have too much time to inspect the bait. This is the exact moment you need to introduce chaos. When you use the tangled line technique on a dead calm day, the erratic, dying action is the only thing that can trigger a reaction strike. The fish is not eating because it is hungry. It is attacking out of pure instinct because a struggling, dying creature is flashing right in front of its nose. The unpredictable jerks and dead pauses force the fish to make a split-second decision. On days when traditional methods leave you sweating and cursing in the boat with 0 bites, embracing the ugly tangled presentation will save you from going home skunked. Let us picture the scene when you finally decide to try this. You are out on the boat with your best fishing buddy. He is casting a perfectly tied jig, working it like a seasoned professional. You take your rod, intentionally spin some twists into your line, leave a messy loop near the spool, and make a sloppy cast. Your buddy is going to look at you like you have absolutely lost your mind. He will probably offer to help you untangle your reel. He will tell you that you are wasting your time. You just smile, nod, and watch your line floating awkwardly on the water. You give the rod a soft twitch. The twisted line absorbs the shock, making your lure do a weird, dying flutter under the surface. 10 seconds later, the water erupts. Your rod bends completely in half. Your reel starts screaming as a huge fish takes off for the deep water. Your buddy drops his jaw in absolute shock as you net the biggest catch of the weekend. That conversation right there, the moment you explain that you messed up your line on purpose, is priceless. It completely shatters everything they think they know about the sport. You go from being the guy with the messy reel to the guy who knows a secret they do not. The biggest argument against this technique is the fear of losing a fish. People think, if I have a tangle or a knot in my line, it is going to break. The line is compromised. And yes, there is a tiny element of risk involved. But let us be brutally honest for a minute. What is the point of having a perfectly strong, unbroken line if you never actually get a bite in the first place? You are protecting a 0% success rate. When you create a controlled tangle, like the twisted section above the leader we talked about, you are not destroying the main breaking strength of your braided line. You are simply altering the presentation mechanics. You just have to be smart about it. You do not set the hook like you are trying to rip the lips off a shark. You use a sweeping, firm hook set to tighten the chaotic line and drive the hook home. Once the line goes tight under the weight of the fish, the temporary slack and tangles stretch out. You are back to fighting the fish normally. You trade a tiny percentage of line strength for a massive increase in the number of strikes. It is a calculated risk that pays off with heavier live wells. If we look closely at the biological science of how predatory fish operate, this whole bizarre concept makes total sense. Fish like bass, pike, and muskie are ambush predators. Their brains are hardwired by millions of years of evolution to conserve energy. Chasing down a fast, perfectly swimming minnow burns precious calories. In the wild, if a predator expends more energy catching food than the food provides, it will eventually die. Therefore, their eyes and lateral lines are highly tuned to single out the weakest, most erratic target in the vicinity. A perfectly straight line pulling a lure in a straight path does not trigger this instinct. It triggers curiosity, sure, but not necessarily the killer instinct. The intentional tangle, however, creates a movement profile that matches a distressed central nervous system in a baitfish. The delayed twitches, the sudden stops, the weird sinking angles. To a predator, this screams high reward and low effort. You are not just fooling their eyes, you are hacking their biological programming. You are serving them a meal that their evolution tells them they absolutely cannot pass up. That is why the strikes on a tangled, messy presentation are often so violent. This technique is not just for calm lakes and ponds. It takes on a whole new level of effectiveness in rivers and streams with moving water. Fishing a perfect line in a river often leads to an unnatural presentation. The current catches your tight line and drags your lure across the water, much faster than a real fish would naturally drift. It creates a swinging pendulum effect that trout and smallmouth bass easily recognize as fake. But when you introduce a deliberate tangle, or a heavy slack loop into your cast, you achieve what fly fishermen call a dead drift. You cast upstream, the messy, tangled line floats down naturally with the current. Because there is no direct tension pulling on the lure, it tumbles helplessly over rocks and drops into deep holes, exactly like a stunned or dying baitfish swept away by the river. The tangled line absorbs the drag of the rushing water, allowing the lure to bounce along the bottom freely. A massive brown trout sitting behind a boulder is completely ignoring the guys pulling spinners tightly against the current. But when your drifting, tumbling, chaotic presentation rolls past his face, he strikes without hesitation. If you are going to commit to trying this bizarre secret, you need to adjust your gear slightly to make it work in your favor. You cannot just use a stiff, heavy broomstick of a fishing rod. Because you are dealing with intentional slack and messy line dynamics, you need a rod with a soft, sensitive tip. When a fish strikes a perfectly tight line, you feel it instantly. But when a fish inhales a lure on a tangled, semi-slack line, you might not feel the classic tap-tap right away. Instead, you will notice the line slowly moving sideways, or the tangle suddenly pulling tight on the surface of the water. A rod with a soft tip allows the fish to take the bait and turn without feeling the immediate resistance of the rod backbone. You also want to use a high-visibility braided main line. Since you are watching the tangles and loops on the water more than you are feeling the lure, being able to see every tiny twitch of the line is critical. When that messy coil of line suddenly darts to the left, you drop the rod tip, reel up the slack, and hit them hard. Let us look back at the history of fishing for a moment. Every single major breakthrough in lure design or technique sounded completely insane when it was first introduced. When guys first started putting heavy lead weights inside hollow plastic tubes and dragging them on the bottom, people laughed at them. Now, the tube jig is a staple in every tackle box. When anglers started tying hooks in the middle of a plastic worm instead of the end, creating the wacky rig, traditionalists thought it was a joke. Yet, the wacky rig is arguably the greatest bass catching technique ever invented. It works because it looks ridiculous, erratic, and broken in the water. Intentionally tangling your line or twisting your presentation is simply the next evolution of breaking the rules. We are moving beyond just changing the shape of the lure. We are changing the very physics of how the lure connects to the angler. The guys who are willing to experiment with this ugly, chaotic method today are the ones who will be winning local tournaments tomorrow. Do not be afraid to be the weird guy on the lake. Innovation always looks like a mistake at first glance. The absolute most critical part of this entire tangled line technique is mastering the pause. With a normal tight line presentation, a pause is just a brief stop in the action. The lure stops, maybe sinks a little, but it remains heavily controlled by the line tension. With a tangled or twisted setup, the pause becomes the main event. When you stop your rod, the energy stored in the twists and tangles slowly releases. The lure might quiver for 3 or 4 seconds, while absolutely nothing is happening on your end of the rod. It might slowly spin around backwards. You have to force yourself to be patient. Cast it out, give it a sloppy pop, and then do absolutely nothing. Watch the floating mess of line. Let the unnatural physics do the work for you. It takes a lot of discipline to just stand there and let your bait sit dead in the water, suspended by a weird tangle. But I promise you, 9 times out of 10, the strike is going to happen right in the middle of that long, chaotic, dead pause. The fish will sit there, watch it quiver helplessly, and finally crush it out of pure predatory instinct. So here is the ultimate challenge for your very next fishing trip. I want you to dedicate just 30 minutes to doing everything wrong. Leave your perfectionism on the dock. Tie on your favorite soft plastic jerkbait. Intentionally spin your line to create a nasty coil right above the leader, or cast it out and leave a massive, sloppy bow of line on the water. Do not reel it in smoothly. Jerk it wildly. Let it sit on total slackline. Watch the wind blow the tangles around. Embrace the absolute chaos of a terrible presentation. It is going to feel incredibly uncomfortable for the first 5 minutes. You are going to want to reel it in and fix it. Fight that urge. Keep your eyes glued to the line. When that bizarre, twitching, dying presentation finally provokes a savage strike from a fish that was ignoring you all morning, your entire perspective on fishing will change forever. You will finally understand that the illusion of a wounded, dying baitfish requires a little bit of genuine messiness. Nature is not perfect, survival is not smooth, and catching big fish requires you to mimic the ugly reality of the wild. Let us bring it all together. For years we have been obsessed with flawless casts, tight lines, and perfectly rhythmic retrieves. But today, we completely shattered that illusion. We uncovered the bizarre truth that perfection actually signals danger to a mature predator. The biggest takeaway here is the plot twist. The very mistakes we curse at, the tangles, the twists, the slackline, are exactly what create the chaotic, impossible-to-replicate movements of a truly dying baitfish. By intentionally introducing a little chaos into your line, you are no longer just pulling a piece of plastic through the water. You are hacking into the biological instinct of a predator, forcing them to strike at what looks like the easiest, most helpless meal in the lake. Embracing the ugly presentation will fundamentally change how you approach tough days on the water. Thank you so much for watching and keeping an open mind. If this video made you rethink your strategy, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a like to show your support, and I want to hear from you in the comments. Are you brave enough to intentionally mess up your line on your next trip? Or are you still terrified of the tangle? Let us debate it down below, and I will see you on the next one.